Well, Year 13s have just spent a week doing mock exams in preparation for the real deal, which happens in June, so I hope they all went well. And with Year 12 this week, I've been talking to them about Lisbeth van Zoonen's feminist theories regarding representation of women. And so it feels a little bit like a coincidence that a couple of the texts that I want to talk to you about today are to do with the representations of gender. But of course, it shouldn't really be seen as a coincidence because so much of the media that we consume, or so much of the media that's out there, is concerned with or interested in representations of gender or gender itself. One of these two texts actually used in the lessons for Van Zoonen, particularly useful, was a YouTube video that's arrived or was uploaded within the past week or so. It's called Be a Lady, they said. And it's a video narrated and, I suppose, presented by the actress Cynthia Nixon, who was one of the four main characters in the 90s and noughties TV comedy drama show Sex and the City, as well as the two movies that followed that, but was actually written by a blogger. The piece that the video itself is actually a blog post written by a woman called Camille Rainville, narrated by Cynthia Nixon and directed by a guy called Paul McLean. And essentially it's a video which exposes the hypocrisies and the unrealistic nature of everything that women are told they should be, really from childhood all the way through their lives. And of course, as you'd imagine with something like this, the media is really criticised for the way it offers women maybe a very narrow perspective of what they should be, but also a very contradictory one as well. It's a really interesting video. We talked about it at length. It was really interesting to see the students' take on it as well, whereas I came away from the video feeling maybe that a little bit pessimistic, perhaps, that actually that these ideas, this contradictory nature of the messages that are sent to women, this kind of impossibility of being perfect, of still after years and years and years representing this template of beauty, of femininity to women, made me feel a little bit pessimistic, as if this would never end. What was interesting is that some of the students in my class felt much more optimistic about it. They said it was inspirational. They felt that actually the kind of message was doesn't matter what you're told, you can be whatever you want to be. There was a very hopeful message in there. So it was a really interesting lesson, or a really interesting way of looking at a media text, and looking at preferred readings and negotiated readings and so on and so forth. But without doubt, really slick, really interesting bit of filmmakings, really powerful words, the use of juxtaposition to kind of create meaning through showing opposing ideas, the way that images married up with words was done really well. It's a really smart bit of sort of filmmaking, and a sort of montage of lots of different shots and some quite poignant moments as well, and some really quite modern sort of moments that keep it in a current context. Images of Donald Trump and Harvey Weinstein make this very much of its time. So yeah, have a look at that. I'd be interested to see what you think, and even if you saw it in the lesson this week, and I'm sure that if you've been talking about this if you do study the media, and obviously if you were in my lesson you were talking about it as well. So any additional thoughts? If you've had time to reflect on that, let me know. I still think it's powerful. I think it's well done. I'm sure that not everyone will agree with its message as we had in the classroom, but on the whole I think it's a really interesting short piece of media. The second piece, product that I want to talk about, I suppose is similar in some ways, and it follows on from looking at representations of gender. I actually asked my class to go away and make a short film that looked at what it means to be a man, and look at the idea of all the things that the media tells men they should be, in representations of masculinity. And the second media product I want to look at kind of does both representations of women and men, and is much more mainstream and will be seen by far more people than the Be a Lady They Said video, I should imagine, and that is the Taylor Swift video that landed yesterday for a track called The Man. I'll admit, first and foremost, and this may come as a surprise to some of you, I'm not the world's biggest Taylor Swift fan. I'm not necessarily part of the demographic she's aiming at, although what is amazing about Swift's career is just how broad an audience she reaches. And this is a video which has already gained a lot of notoriety and people talking about it for the fact that and I'm going to warn you now, we are going to enter into spoilers territory. Okay, that the entire video is about the day in the life of a successful man, a businessman, a jet setter, someone, somewhat of a playboy, and the main male character who we stay with throughout the entire video is played by Taylor Swift. There's some pretty good prosthetics. I'm sure there's probably a little bit of CGI thrown in there as well. She looks a little bit like Tom Cruise, I suppose, in some ways. Maybe not. But the video plays out, I suppose, a narrative whereby this day in the life encompasses all the kind of things that a man can do, someone with that privileged position, the things that they can enjoy, the privileges they enjoy, the things they can get away with, whether that's kind of being the best boss and having everyone's adoration and respect, posing with a baby or a toddler just to prove to the women around that they're a great dad, enjoying a jet set lifestyle like Leonardo DiCaprio, who's name checked in a kind of Wolf of Wall Street scene, surrounded by half-naked women on a yacht, going to strip clubs and exploiting women with lots of money and substance abuse and so on and so forth, urinating against the side of a train station platform without anyone making a complaint, and man-spreading across an underground train so that no one else can actually kind of have a seat to themselves and so on. It's I don't know, it's fairly cliched stuff. It's a very well made video, as you'd expect, probably the budget that Swift is able to enjoy for her music videos. Like I said, it feels a little bit sort of a cliched take on all the things that men can do, and it makes a reasonable point. I'm sure that there's sort of a slight tongue-in-cheek and an exaggeration of some things, but it's making a point about the things that men can get away with, maybe in certain sectors of society that women probably just can't. And of course, whilst this is not perhaps something that would be described as an example of perhaps Judith Butler's queer theory, it certainly is interesting in terms of representations of gender and maybe exposing the patriarchy that Bell Hooks talks about, looking at the differences and expectations of men and women and so on and so forth. Have a look, see what you think. It's going to be a massively popular video, I'm sure. And then, of course, at the end, we see the actual Taylor Swift. She turns out to be the director of the video as the video itself steps out of itself and finishes. We see Taylor Swift has been the director, and she talks to Taylor Swift, the man, about the performance. And it's quite, whilst this is an interesting video regarding representations, I think that's slightly a little bit of a red herring, because in of itself, it's really not too much different to the Beyonce video If I Were a Boy from about 10 or 11 years ago, where Beyonce plays out this role reversal in a song where she takes the sort of the male role of a police officer and behaves in a way as perhaps her partner would do if he was a man, which was done in a kind of more dramatic way, a slightly more subtle way, played with a kind of couple of twists along there, but that video was pretty good. And whilst Taylor Swift's video is, like I said, a lot more comedic and exaggerated, it deals largely with the same sort of topic area, and that can be discussed. But why I think this is a slight red herring is that Taylor Swift's video is more about being a Taylor Swift video. There are numerous references to other Taylor Swift videos within this. And this is something that's already being paid attention to. In fact, I believe within sort of a day of the video arriving, there are other videos saying, have you spotted all of the Easter eggs and all of the things noted on the Taylor Swift video? References to her old songs, references to her old albums, and of course that moment at the end where she actually performs as herself talking to the actor. And this is the key part of the video for me. This is such an indicator of a postmodern music video, something which relies on previous knowledge of the artist's work, pastiche of different types of media as well. It is in part theatrical movie, but it's also in part music video. It relies on our knowledge of other texts such as The Wolf of Wall Street. There's a moment where Taylor Swift's father makes an appearance, so we need to know who he is. Even the voice of the man is not performed by Taylor Swift herself, it's performed by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And so there's so much different media going on here, so many different little codes that are there to be enjoyed, and intertextual references that really don't require your understanding to appreciate the video or to get what it's saying, but are Easter eggs, exactly as they're described for that. So this is absolutely typical of postmodernism in music video today, and for me this is why it is, it's a really interesting watch, and why how the fans are really looking at this video, and how it completely embraces that fandom, something that we'll talk about with people like Henry Jenkins. This is a video to be deciphered and decoded, not just from an audience like myself who aren't fans, but for the true fans to dissect and look at. In fact, if you look at the comment section under the video, there's almost a competition to see who can be the most kind of the biggest fan and spot even the most minute references. Bringing it back to representations of gender, though, I suppose, what's interesting about the end is that the last few shots are a series of stills where we see Taylor Swift go from the Taylor Swift we know to the man of the sort of eponymous man in the video, through a series of prosthetics and makeup. And the credits come up throughout that time. Directed by Taylor Swift, written by Taylor Swift, starring Taylor Swift. And then the very interesting and very revealing one, owned by Taylor Swift. And of course this is a reference to the fact that there's been a huge sort of law courts and controversy and lots of legal wranglings about Taylor Swift's back catalogue and who owns it and whether or not she can perform it. And for me, this is where the stuff about representations of gender and patriarchy really kick in, because that notion of her owning her own music is probably the most interesting and progressive part, or the most poignant moment when it comes to this whole satire on how men are represented, because it took Taylor Swift a long time to own the things that she's been creating, to take ownership of her own back catalogue and so on and so forth, and it's still something that's a point of contention. So a video which has got a very simplistic, perhaps cliched message on the surface, but underlying it one that talks about the patriarchal nature of the structure of media organisations, of record labels, of the entertainment industry, and at the same time being one of the most postmodern texts around at the minute, which is completely indicative of music video. So anyway, have a look at that. Tell me what you think, as always, in the comments. Lots of stuff to discuss there and think about. I'd be interested to know where you think I've got it right or wrong, and what your own thoughts are as well. But until then, have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.